We have a quorum, and it is the appointed time. Welcome to the meeting of the Bills Committee on Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024. I will now invite the government officials to come in. We will first discuss the policy matters of the bill today, and if there is time, we will start the clause-by-clause scrutiny today. Here is the representatives from the government today. Ms. Ivy Law, Deputy Secretary for Environment and Ecology. Ms. Wendy Out, Principal Assistant Secretary for Environment and Ecology. Mr. Philip Mack, Assistant Secretary for Environment and Ecology. Ms. Charmaine Wong, Head of the Private Columbaria Affairs Office. Mr. Francis Chung, Assistant Director of the FEHD. Mr. Jonathan Look, Senior Assistant Law Draftsman of the DOJ. All the members are seated. First of all, what is your take on the submission of public opinions? Should we invite public submission, written submission from the public, or conduct a public hearing? Please press the button if you have views. What do you think about inviting written submission from the public or conduct a public hearing? Any views? Now, most members think written submission is more appropriate. That is decided. I will ask the Secretariat to invite the public to submit written submission by way of a notice on the Legislative website. The submissions will be referred to the administration for a consolidated reply. The legal advisor has sent a letter to inquire of matters about the bill, that is CB brackets 168, 2025, brackets 3. The administration's reply is pending. When will the administration be ready? Chair, we believe that the reply will be ready before the next meeting. Now we will first invite the government to walk us through the bill. Members who would like to speak, you may now press the button. Ms. Ivy Law, please. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Several years ago, there were general non-compliance issues with private columbarium. As a result, in 2017, please speak up, Ms. Ivy Law. Thank you. So by way of the private columbaria ordinance, the government has established a licensing system to ensure that private columbaria comply with laws and regulations. This will enhance the protection of consumer rights and encourage sustainable operation model of the columbaria industry. Now, before the establishment of the licensing system, many members of the public have purchased niches or even interred the ancestors' ashes in these niches. So the law was clear. Besides regulating newcomer of the industry, society and Legislative agreed that the government should adopt a pragmatic approach in regulating the so-called pre-cut-off columbaria. Since the law was implemented in 2017, the enforcement was smooth. With the efforts of the Licensing Board of Private Columbaria, all the pre-cut-off columbaria with a license application are confirmed to be compliant with the Fire Safety and Building Ordinance. They have met all the conditions, and 13 have been awarded the license, involving some 190,000 niches. Having considered the experience from enforcing the law, we decided to propose amendments to the law to enhance the regulation as well as enhancing protection for consumers. First of all, since the implementation of the law, it has been 7 years. Society expects the government to complete the assessments of all the application to weed out all the non-complying private columbaria. We are aware that there are 48 pre-cuts of columbaria which had only submitted license applications. If they eventually fail to fulfill the requirements and get a license, they may trigger an ash disposal operation. And according to the law, to the present requirements, they don't have the option to apply for an exemption. So we decide to propose amendments so that pre-cuts of columbaria meeting certain conditions will be given an option to apply for exemption to continue to operate at their current confined scale without triggering large-scale disposal of ashes already interred. Now, the conditions include that these private columbaria must not be located in densely populated areas. That is a balance against society's interest. Second, about penalties. Now, the private columbaria office has been enforcing the regulations through inspection and following up on complaints. Since the implementation of the law, private columbaria with specified instruments are largely complying with the law. However, some penalties are disproportionate to the benefits and consequences brought about by breaches of the conditions of the specified instruments. Therefore, we propose to increase the penalty for enhanced deterrence, including non-compliance with enforcement notices, and also proposing offences to prohibit overselling and overplacing of ashes. We will also prohibit keeping of ashes or or selling of interment rights when the license has been suspended or revoked. 3, about the Private Columbaria Appeal Board. Now, under the law, there is an appeal mechanism. The PCAB, the appeal board, will handle appeals lodged against decisions made by the licensing board to ensure the adoption of a consistent standard by appeal panels. The bill sets out that the PCAB may receive and consider new materials that have not been made available to the licensing board only upon special grounds being shown. The last provision involves the temporary keeping of ashes by masons' workshops. Now, since the law was implemented, the government adopted administrative measures to allow masons' workshops to keep ashes temporarily for the purpose of their work. Now, the current arrangements are effective in balancing the needs of the mason trade and the regulation. Now, we propose to revise the law so that eligible mason workshops will not be subject to the ordinance. Now, we have consulted the trade, including the operators of private columbaria, masons, workshops, and also concerns groups. According to the public consultation, all proposals have received more than 80% of support in person or writing. We have also consulted the panel and received member support for our proposals. Subject to the passage of the bill by the Council, we will continue to provide support to operators of private columbarias to help them understand the new arrangements so that they can make informed decisions and step up their responsibilities under the law. Thank you. 6 members have raised their hands. Dr. Professor Chen Wing-Kwong, Mr. Ambrose Lam, Mr. Stephen Ho, Mr. Jovi Chen, Mr. Tony Jie, and Mr. Benson Look. Each member will get 5 minutes. Questions and answers included. Professor Chen. Thank you, Chair. Concerning the Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024, I have several questions. According to the government, since the ordinance was first enacted on the 30th of June 2017, as at the 30th of November 2024, at least 80 private columbaria were suspended of their operation or ceased operations because of failure to submit specified instruments, withdrawal, or being rejected by the licensing board. Now, concerning the provisions to amend the cut-off date to 8 a.m. on the 18th of June 2014, and also changing the cessation of sale date to the 30th of June 2017. I understand this is because of the need to avert large-scale ash disposal. But for those private Columbaria who has had their application rejected, has not submitted a specified instrument, or had license application rejected, it is unfair. Now, under the specified instruments, there are some exemptions. However, if certain private Columbaria still fails to secure the specified instruments after the relaxation of the exemption and are ordered to cease operation, is there a backup plan on the government's part to avoid triggering ash disposal and hurt consumers' interest? Now, as at the 30th of November 2024, there are 59 pre-cut-off Columbaria pursuing applications for license. Among them, 11 had also applied for exemption. For the remaining 48, they had only submitted license applications and have yet to meet the requirements for a license. Does the government know why that most private Columbaria only apply for a license but not the specified instrument for exemption? Is it because the procedure is too complicated, or is it because of ignorance of the arrangements? Will the government step up communication with the trade so that the trade understands the conditions for applying for a specified instrument? Ms. Ivy Law. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Professor Chen. I will address the points one by one. First of all, we are going to relax the conditions for applying for an exemption. Will it be unfair for private Columbaria which have already ceased operation? Now, we have reviewed private Columbaria which have or are going to cease operation one by one. They fail to meet the conditions on various fronts. So even after the relaxation of the exemption criteria, they are still ineligible. So it is not unfair to them. Second question. What if private Columbaria still fail to secure a license after the relaxation? Now, I emphasize that this is just an option for the private Columbaria to apply for an exemption. Whether the private Columbaria decides to continue to apply for a specified instrument or a license is up to them. Application for a specified instrument will not prevent the private Columbaria to apply for a license. If eventually the Columbaria fail to meet building and fire safety requirements, they will still be asked to cease operation. If they are found to be substandard, there is a set of clear procedures to deal with the interred ashes under the law. The third question, why parts of the 59 pre-cut-off Columbaria only applied for license but not the exemption instrument? Under the ordinance, only licensed private Columbaria can sell or let out niches. So based on operational needs, some private Columbaria decide to apply for a license rather than a condition, rather than an exemption. On the other hand, some Columbaria fail to meet the conditions for being granted an exemption, so that's why they didn't do so. On the other hand, members can be assured the colleagues in the private Columbaria Affairs Office are all experienced case manager. They will explain the details to the applicants.
Professor Chen also asked if you will step up your communication with the trade to explain to them about the amendment bill. Thank you, Madam Chair. As I mentioned, colleagues in the private Columbaria Affairs Office are case managers of applications, so they will explain to applicants about the procedures, and after the passage of the bill, we will step up communication with the trade. If I may remind members, please do not name the applicants when you are quoting cases in order not to undermine their applications. Mr. Lam San-kan. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 5 questions at hand, but I will put 3 of them first. As for the remaining 2, I will ask in my second round. First, people waiting for a PRH units are on the queue for a long time, and some ancestors are waiting for niches as well. I know a case where the ashes of the ancestors were placed at residential homes for a few years. We have a shortage of Columbaria and niches in Hong Kong. We need to know how many niches we need. Well, it's easy to calculate that. We have to calculate how many people, or take stock of how many people pass away every year. Well, some people may choose to move the ashes of their ancestors to the mainland or other places. We have, say, 40 to 50 private Columbaria in Hong Kong. Given the prospering market, everyone wants to join the trade. Even I want to. Second, I visited 2 to 3 private Columbaria that were very dangerous. Some of them are located in private premises. Now it's safer because although incense were burned, no paper offerings were allowed. When we worship, we have to open a table, and that actually blocks the access, and this will give rise to fire hazard. My third question. I wonder if the government know how much a niche costs. That's my question. We need to know the revenue of operating private Columbaria. It's actually very high. So I think that, well, I will ask about penalty later on. Thank you. Ms. Law? Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lam, for the comment. We completely agree with what Mr. Lam said. We must work on the applications of pre-cut-off private Columbaria. Let me first address your third question. That is the price of niches. As for private niches, as far as we understand, for single niches, it costs about $150,000 to $300,000. For double niches, it costs some $200,000 to $400,000. We're talking about private niches. As for public niches, we allow for a 20-year of placement, and it costs $2,400 to $3,000. And after 10 years, you can extend it for another 20 years. Let me talk about the supply of niches in Hong Kong. I can give you some information. A few years ago, we had a shortage of niches, but with the efforts of the government, there is a stable supply of niches these days. Since mid-2020, there's no waiting time for niches. Every month, we make available niches for application, and we do have quotas that are unused every month. As for private Columbaria, as mentioned, the licensing board have issued 13 licenses for private Columbaria. As these Columbaria have licenses, they can sell niches. They offer a total of 190,000 niches. We have 50,000 people passed away every year. Most of them have their corpse cremated. Some of them go for green burying. The government want to encourage green burial, and 18% of people who pass away actually choose this form of burying. We look at the supply of public and private niches. We don't foresee a shortage in the near future. We also address the fire hazard issue. Mr. Lam is right. We have to make sure that the fire-related requirements are complied with. We need to make sure that the Columbaria is safe. So please be rest assured that all applicants of license, exemption, and TSOL fulfill the fire and building requirements. We grant a special instrument to them only when they meet all the relevant requirements. For license application or license applicants, they have to fulfill more stringent requirements. Next, Mr. Stephen Ho. Thank you, Madam Chair. We scrutinized the private Columbaria bill a few years ago, and the scrutiny back then took a long time. Now we are amending the ordinance. I hope that there will be a soft landing of this proposal. I support the amendment bill, but I think that the government should explain in detail about the bill. The government said that 80 to 90% of people supported the proposals. I think that the government should give us some analysis on the figures that they provide. Say, for example, Hong Kong. People living there would definitely support your proposal. Can you talk about your consultation paper for potential applicants? What are the worries? Some of them told me that they think that the penalty is too high and they may be inadvertently caught by the law. For residents of Hong Kong who are greatly affected by the business, they would of course support your proposal. Can you highlight some of the issues raised by the people during the consultation so that we can discuss it? For the Private Columbaria Affairs Office, PCAO, I know that their workload is very heavy, and people are complaining that they have to wait a long time in order to get hold of a niche. I'd like to ask about your manpower deployment. Will you initiate proactive inspections instead of depending on people to file complaint? can you train people from other departments so that they would join the PCAO in order to speed up all the applications processing? Thank you. Ms. Law? Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me talk about the response that we received during consultation. Apart from written response, we also met with representatives of the trade, concerned groups, and so on. Their views are set out in the paper that was submitted to the panel of LegCo. Apart from supporting views, well, some people asked whether we should allow private Columbaria located in densely populated area apply for exemptions. Some operators think that the penalty proposed is too high. And some said that we should allow applications that were rejected by the Town Planning Board to proceed. And some said that we should ask the Columbaria to dispose of their ashes if they have their license application rejected. And the Masons Workshop actually support the proposal. But actually, that is 85% of the people that we interviewed actually support our proposals. On the manpower deployment, I will defer to my colleague, Mr. Mack. Thank you. Under the Private Columbaria Affairs Office, well, during the initial stage of the establishment of the office, our colleagues are mostly responsible for licensing applications and their scrutiny. And we also have an enforcement team. The team will handle complaints of the people regarding unlicensed operation of Columbaria. As we have approved a lot of specified instruments, we will enhance the manpower under enforcement team, and the licensing team will see its manpower decreased. We have to see if the licensees comply with our requirements.
A follow-up question. I thank the government for accepting the public's views to extend the period where Mason workshops can keep the ashes. Now, you just ask the complainants to call the police in some cases. I think there are lots of complaints in society. Director, in the cases that we have dealt with, there were very few cases where consumers have paid the fee and the ashes cannot be interred. Now, we have conducted some 3,000 inspections and have successfully prosecuted 10 cases. Concerning complaints against the operational model of the private columbarium, for example, bad attitude of staff or illegal parking of staff members, we will work with the private columbarium to call for remedy. Ms. Jovi Chan, thank you, Chair. Concerning the Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024, the penalties are enhanced from a maximum of $10,000 to a maximum of $5 million on indictments and 2 years imprisonment. So this is where the law has been made more stringent. On relaxation, temporary keeping of ashes has been extended from 7 calendar days to 14 calendar days. It has balanced the needs of various stakeholders, so that's great. I'm aware that during the consultation period, 94% of the public gave you their support. So I have 3 questions. I would save some for the second round. I'm asking the 3 questions on behalf of 3 groups of stakeholders: the public, the applicants, that is the private Columbaria operator, and government officials. First, private Columbaria, which have ceased operation for failing to meet the condition. There are 10, involving some 8,000 interred ashes. There are 3 such Columbaria in Hong Kong. There have been some disputes concerning fees paid for these cases. So how can we protect consumers' rights and the ancestors? And how can we help the affected niches and relocate them to a new columbarium? So these 2 questions are asked on behalf of the public. Deputy Secretary, thank you, Chen. Thank you, Ms. Chen. We agree that we must give support to private Columbaria which have ceased operation. Under the law, if a columbarium ceases operation, the operator must offer an arrangement for the affected consumers to seek compensation on site for at least a year. Also, an advertisement must be put out on newspaper and so on to notify the consumers of such an arrangement. Concerning the ashes, the most convenient way is to relocate the ashes to public Columbaria. We have a more abundant supply of public niches in recent years. Second, the consumers can purchase a niche with other public Columbaria to rehouse the ashes of their ancestors. Now, for cases where compensation claim is not made, we have some 70,000 places with the Private Columbarium Affairs Office and the FEHD for rehousing these affected ashes. So far, only 2,000 are utilized. So we have abundant places for temporarily placing the ashes. We understand that some family members have emigrated and some family members cannot claim back the ashes for other reasons. So we will provide a temporary location for placing these ashes. According to our experience, in most cases, the ashes would be reclaimed subsequently. So that's on relocating the affected niches. Whether the affected families would suffer a financial loss. That was the legislative intent of the ordinance back in 2017. We would like to protect the consumers with the law. So the law clearly specified that a columbarium is only allowed to sell interment rights if it has a license, and there are other clauses to protect the consumers under the law. I think Ms. Chan's question was, what about financial disputes ongoing? Yes, that's what I meant. What about ongoing financial disputes? How can the government facilitate negotiations between the parties? Thank you, Chen. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Before the implementation of the law, the agreement signed between the consumers and private columbarium operators comes in many forms. Some are oral agreements. some are phrased as a tribute to the temple, and there are other arrangements as well. The government is not in a position to intervene in these private matters. Our role lies in helping the family members to relocate the ashes of their ancestors, because after all, that is the prioritized concern of the family members. Maybe Ms. Chan can ask the other questions in the second round. Mr. Tony Jiang. Thank you, Chair. I was a member on the Bills Committee on the Privacy Columbaria bill back then. I understand how complicated the matter is. Now the government is being pragmatic. The enhancements this time concern relaxing the conditions for applying for an exemption. I think this is a pragmatic approach. 7 years have passed since the implementation of the ordinance. Now, some 20 private Columbaria have been granted a license or exemption instrument. I'm not happy with the progress. This is too slow. So since you are proposing a relaxation to the arrangement, there are 38 eligible private Columbaria for applying for an exemption. So can you set a target for processing the applications? Don't come back in 7 years' time and propose another round of enhancements just because you can't process all the applications in time. In terms of manpower, you are stepping up enforcement. So how often did you enforce the law in the past? Now, a $10,000 fine is too low, so I think you need to enhance the deterrence effect. It is disproportionate against the financial gain of selling initials. In terms of prosecuting wrongdoers, did you encounter any difficulties besides the underwhelming penalty? Is there any difficulty in enforcing the law? So I want to understand whether you have any difficulties in gathering evidence and prosecuting the wrongdoers. Now the PCAB, the appeal board, the composition of the panel members varies. So how can you make sure that the appeal board makes consistent decisions? We don't have a lot of experts in the area among the board members, and there are 22 members and 5 members each. So how can you change the situation? Deputy Secretary. Thank you. I thank the member for agreeing that our proposals, especially Proposal 1, are pragmatic. In terms of time required for processing application, let me give you some background. In 2017, when the ordinance was implemented, it was a brand new ordinance. The situation of non-compliance by pre-cut-off Columbaria was serious, and there were all kind of non-compliances. Those Columbaria had to make a lot of efforts to fulfill the conditions, so it indeed took quite a long time. I believe members would understand the situation. The Private Columbaria Affairs Office took steps to speed up processing of applications, for example, setting up case managers and creating templates of application. I agree that we can always do better. The non-compliance issues of pre-cut-off private Columbaria must be dealt with promptly. So we have been working on that premises. Subject to the support of the Council, when we'll be able to deal with the applications. Now for instruments like in principle exemption and a TSOL or temporary suspension of liability, the validity period is 3 years. Subsequent to that, if the licensing board thinks that it is appropriate to extend the extension to extend the suspension, then another 3-year period will be granted, during which the Columbarium has to apply for a license. Failing that, after 3 years, another decision will be made, and that is ultimate. So, in a few years' time, that is within the validity period of the TSOL, all the cases will have been processed. About enforcement, let me give you some figures. As at the end of 2024, the office has conducted 3,200 inspections with 12 arrests made. 11 operators were prosecuted. 10 were convicted. Fine was issued and a criminal record was made. So Mr. Chair asked whether we would change the law to enhance our law enforcement capability. We have. One of the proposals in that regard is proposing an offense for overselling of niches. According to the existing provision, the number of niches placed within the Columbaria cannot exceed the approved amount. However, some consumers would purchase a niche way before the need. And as long as the Columbaria doesn't have niches exceeding the approved amount, they are not breaking the law. So we are proposing that at the point of sale, the number of niches cannot exceed the approved amount. So that's a change we have proposed based on the experience we have gained during enforcement. Currently, we are regulating that through a condition on the license, but we don't think that is powerful enough. So we want to criminalize that practice. Finally, on the work of the appeal board. The PCAB is a statutory body under the ordinance. Now there is a 22-strong board. For each appeal case, on each panel must be chaired or co-chaired by a judge at the appeal court level. Also, the other 4 members, like Mr. Tong Li-Jie mentioned, are from various sectors. They may have a background in accounting, the business sector, and so on. In the past, the appeal board was presented with materials not considered by the licensing board. So some panel did not consider these new materials. So we think it would be better to spell it out clearly in the law. On which conditions, or rather on what special grounds can the appeal board consider new materials which had not been made available to the licensing board. After the passage of this bill, the licensing board will issue guidelines to members of the appeal board to ensure that consistent decisions are made.
到個進度嗰方面，即係
Mr. Tony Chair also asked about the progress of application regarding the 40-odd potential applications. How long would it take for you to process them? Thank you. Regarding pending applications for license and TSOL, as mentioned, they have a 3-year validity period. If they are eligible for an extension of another 3 years, then we will renew their license or TSOL. We believe that within 3 years, we'll be able to process all the applications. Mr. Chair, any follow-up questions? Thank you. We hopefully can process all the applications within 3 years. So are you saying that you're confident that you'll be able to process all the applications within 6 years and you will not come back to amend the ordinance again? I'd also like to know about the level of fine handed down by the court. Regarding overselling of niches, what is the penalty level? I know that you will issue a guidelines to members of the appeal board. As the appeal panel vary in terms of a member's composition, sometimes the decisions handed down by the different panels are inconsistent. I think that you should make the decisions more consistent by issuing them with further guidelines. Regarding the first question, well, I know that the validity period can be 3 years plus 3 years. Can you let Mr. Chair know the time you take to process each application? Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's right. Each case is different. As the Madam Chair said, we look at every case on a case-by-case basis. If applicants are able to submit all the information within a short period of time, then of course we'll be able to handle that application in a short time. The time taken to process each case vary. I'd like to talk about the appeal board. We have code of practice and procedure guidelines for the members of the panel and the board. So there is a set of procedures for them to follow, and we will amend the code of practice for them. That is, they should only consider new materials upon special grounds being shown. Now, in terms of penalty, I will ask the Private Columbaria Affairs Office to supplement. Thank you. As we mentioned, 10 cases were convicted. All of the defendants sustained criminal records. The penalty or fine handed down ranges from a few $1,000s to a few tens of thousands of dollars. Can you let us know how many operations you have conducted and how many people have been convicted? Or the total number of fine handed down by the court? Maybe you can supplement after the meeting. Mr. Benson-Look. Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024, as set out in the paper, I see that the administration is being pragmatic, sympathetic in light of the current situation. I have 3 comments. As set out in the background brief prepared by the Legislative Secretariat, this amendment proposal involves relaxations of requirements. For those who have withdrawn their applications, will the amendment proposal be unfair to them? But according to the paper, it is said that it will not be fair to them because these columbaria could potentially be unsafe. But some columbaria meet the requirements, and they have been licensed prior to the amendment bill, and they've paid the land premium. They may feel that this proposal would be unfair to them. I wonder how the administration look at this. Second, some trade practitioners told us that the site where the Columbaria is situated at do not meet the land use requirements. And they're worried that they will have to demolish all of the structures before they apply for rezoning of land. Is this right? Is this correct? This may not be pragmatic because it's difficult for the operators to demolish their structures before they can file an application. Is there any other way for them to go around it? According to paragraph 4 of the paper, it is said that for the remaining 48 pre-cut-off Columbaria, which had only submitted license applications, they have yet to meet the requirements for a license, and some 287,200 niches were involved. For the temporary placement of niches offered by the FEHD, there are only 7,700 of them. As you mentioned, you have case managers. I'm sure that you have the relevant figures that I'm asking for. How many Columbaria will have their applications approved according to your understanding? Ms. Law, thank you. After relaxing the requirements for the application of exemption, is this unfair to licensed private Columbaria? Well, the option that we're offering is exemption. For a Columbaria with exemption, they cannot let out or sell new niches. For licensed Columbaria, they can sell and let out new niches. So I don't think that this will be unfair to them. Mr. Lugt said that operators of private Columbaria asked him about land use issue. I think that you're referring to operators of pre-cut-off Columbaria. There are different types of pre-cut-off Columbaria. It's difficult for me to give you a answer right now. Maybe we can follow up on the issue with you after the meeting. Now on temporary Columbaria, regarding the 70,000 odd places that we're offering, they are about ashes that are not claimed or unclaimed. Actually, 70% of these sets of ashes were returned to the claimant. So the number is not as high as the member mentioned. And you also ask how many Columbaria will fulfill the requirements upon amendment of the bill. We believe that 38 applicants will meet the requirements involving 270,000 niches that have already been sold. Thank you. Next, Dr. Junius Ho. Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill is here to improve the operation of private Columbaria. The goal or the purpose of this bill is to protect people's rights to properly place the ashes of their ancestors. There is an issue, a real issue here, that has not been resolved. We have to make it flexible for the people. And now there is a form of exemption here. I support that. Regarding paragraph 11 on the issue of overselling niches, I have a comment. Now for summary conviction, there is a fine of $2 million and imprisonment of 6 months. For conviction on indictment, $5 million and 2 years. How do you take enforcement action? On the adduction of evidence, there should be a mechanism or a set of standards. I think that also you need to inform the members of the public, and they have to know if Columbaria is overselling niches or overplacing niche ashes. We have a land registration for property in Hong Kong. We can check the lease at the land registry to see if there is any encumbrances of titles. Will you consider in the near future create a land title search for niches? Say, for example, you let people know whether ashes are placed at Unit 1A at a so-and-so temple. If you do keep such a registry, then people can check the title of the niches at all the Columbaria in Hong Kong. There could be subselling of niches. And some people may vacate their niches. They may try to go through green burial. I think that there should be a system. You should be more forward-looking. There should be a land registry for niches and Columbaria. So that it's easier for us to adduce evidence to charge people of overselling of niches. And you won't have to, say, deploy drones to check if the Columbaria is overselling their niches. Second, I'd like to refer you to the blue bill for summary conviction is $500,000, imprisonment for 6 months. The conviction of indictment is $5 million for 2 years. How come under the new bill, the new ordinance, the summary conviction is subject to 6 months of imprisonment, and on conviction of an indictment is 2 years? Regarding overselling of niches and non-compliance with enforcement notices, shouldn't the penalty for overselling of niches be more serious? Thank you.
Deputy Secretary, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Ho, for endorsing our directions. I thank Dr. Ho for his foresight. So we will consider that when the situation arises. Now, in terms of standard of proof, For inspections conducted by the Private Columbaria Affairs Office, they would learn whether there is overselling or non-compliance of approved plans from the information available online. The licensing conditions for each private columbarium, the number and locations where niches can be placed are available to the public online. So when purchasing niches, the public can have access to these information. Please speak closer to the mic, Deputy Secretary. My apologies. So information is available online in terms of the penalty levels. Dr. Ho mentioned that for the offense of overselling of niches, for a summary conviction, the fine is $2 million and imprisonment for 6 months. For conviction on indictment, $5 million and imprisonment for 2 years. As I said, the value of niches are huge. Overselling by just 2 or 3 would already mean significant financial gain. So under the existing ordinance, the summary conviction just comes with $2 million and 3 years. For indictment, $5 million and 7 years. So we have made reference to that piece of ordinance. Concerning non-compliance of enforcement notices, the fine is $500,000. Non-compliance with enforcement notices covers a wide range of areas. So these are conditions on the specified instruments. They may be simple instructions about daily operation. For example, appropriate cleaning and upkeeping of the niches, and also safekeeping of records. So compared with the situation about overselling of niches, the seriousness is very different. So that's why we propose for non-compliance on summary conviction, it is $500,000. However, on indictment, the maximum fine level is the same. So we have consulted the public about these penalty levels, and we had the support. Allow me, Chairman. Now, I'm not talking about the severity and the scope of the penalty. I'm just talking about the logic. Since one offense comes with a $2 million fine on summary conviction and $5 million on indictments, so it is 2.5 times higher. For enforcement notice, non-compliance convicted on summary conviction or indictment conviction comes with a difference of 10 times. Why is there such a big difference? Dr. Ho is right. As I've mentioned, non-compliance with enforcement notices can cover a wide range of offenses. Some can be really minor. For example, failing to clean the niches. We don't have to fine them so severely. Next, Ms. Jovi Chan. Thank you, Chair. Now, I support the directions of the legislative amendment. The law has been implemented for quite some time. So I would like to ask some questions from the angle of consumer protection. If the law is passed, does it mean that there won't be any unlicensed private columbaria in the market anymore? So this is the second time you are amending this is the first time you are amending the law after it has been implemented. So there are still 59 breeders of columbaria which are not being dealt with yet. So does it mean that the era of unregulated private columbaria has ended? All the newcomers will be licensed and in compliance with the regulations. I want to make sure about the significance of this bill. Now, I'm quite concerned about the situation of overselling. Now, the bill says the niches would be counted towards the approved limit once they are interred. However, there is a law where a niche can place the ashes from two ancestors. In the past, the jar was bigger, and then we ran out of niches. So we will encourage the family members to keep the ashes of the ancestors in, say, a ring or a smaller jar, unlike the big urns in the olden days. So with the enhanced penalty for overselling, how can you enforce the law? Do the Columbaria have to specify the number of ancestors' ashes to be held in a single niche on the application document? How do you define overplacing? 3, I have received a complaint, or rather, a call for assistance. An elderly lady has purchased a niche with a private columbaria before the cut-off date. She even presented to me the receipt, but that was not a standard contract. Her name was, say, Chen Xiu Mui, but the name was different on her identity card. So her family members with that receipt could not have her ashes interred because the private columbarium did not recognize that receipt. So we need to know what kind of content the contract needs to have in order for the contract to be valid. Usually, the signatory to the contract would have passed away, and it's their family members who are holding that receipt to claim that niche place. So this is a real case I have come upon. Because of the difference in names on the contracts and on the identity card, the ashes of that lady could not be interred. Deputy Secretary, I thank Ms. Chen for supporting our amendments. The significance, as mentioned by Ms. Rebecca Chen, is that the ordinance has been implemented for quite some time. Applications for specified instruments made by pre-cut-off columbaria needs to be dealt with promptly. Now, for various reasons, some columbaria still failed to meet the licensing conditions. That's why we are providing another option to let them operate in a confined scale. So with the new provisions, we can process the application for specified instruments more effectively and end the process sooner. So I thank Ms. Rebecca Chen for her suggestions. We have confidence that within the validity period of the temporary suspension of liability, we can process all the applications. Now, after the passage of this law, only licensed private columbaria operators will be allowed to sell and lease out new niches. The unregulated selling and rent and leasing of columbaria niches no longer exist after the law kicked in 2017. The office will continue to conduct inspections. For columbaria which sell niches without a license, we have successfully prosecuted some of them. Third, on law enforcement, I will defer to the Private Columbaria Affairs Office. I just want to say that for overselling, the number of niches allowed to be placed in the premises will be listed out clearly on the license, and there is a record we keep. The office will conduct a check on them, and we will respond to every complaint. May I defer to the colleagues in the office for more details? Finally, on standard contracts. Ms. Rebecca Chen is right, that is necessary. So on vetting application, the licensing board will vet the templates of contracts. We will ensure that those contractual terms are present on the specimen. On enforcement, Mr. Francis Cheung, Assistant Director. Thank you. Ms. Chen raised a question that several ancestors' ashes can be placed in a single niche in the public Columbaria. What about private Columbaria? It's different. On the application documents, they need to specify the number of ancestor ashes to be placed in a single niche. Once the approval is made, it will be specified clearly on the approved plan, and we will assign a number to each of the niches. We have uploaded all the approved plans and approval conditions on our website. Members of the public can learn about the approval process for the columbarium concerned. Next, Ms. Starry Lee, Dr. Starry Lee. Thank you. When the law was passed, I was a Bills Committee member, and the discussion was still fresh in my mind. So I agree with other members. The processing time for the application is too slow. You gave us a grand answer, but since I'm serving the Hong Kong constituents, I know what the situation is. It is 3 years after 3 years. So can you streamline your application process? Many stakeholders told me that they could make a phone call to the office and sort out the issues, but there are different views from different departments, and it is not a one-stop service. So like the government always does, different departments tend to raise different questions at different times. So of course, the applicant has the responsibility to respond to these questions. But from a public point of view, maybe you can coordinate the work of the departments better and speed up the process. As I said, your answer was grand. There are case managers for handling each case. So can these case managers coordinate the questions from various departments and ask the applicants to respond to them in one go? You know how departments are. After a round of questions, there are always more to come. So please speed things up. Naturally, the applicants would like to have their application processed as soon as possible because it involves their interest. Now, if you ask a council member, we don't think it is an easy task, not to mention for the operators of private Columbaria. I hope the case managers can really do their job to avoid so that the applicants doesn't have to go through the maze of red tape. Second, I've just talked to the district council members in the districts. They also want to speed things up. One reason is that people who have purchased a niche should be protected by knowing that their Columbaria have a license. And for those substandard columbarium in old buildings, we should tell the consumers that these are substandard columbaria, and there should be no more delay. Lastly, according to my constituents, they had a very bad experience calling the office. So can you improve the workflow?
寶貴意見啦。咁
Deputy Secretary, thank you for your comment. We heard you saying that our processing time is too long. We will work on that. We ask the Private Columbaria Affairs Office to see if we can streamline any workflow or procedures. As we mentioned, under the office we have case managers, and there is interdepartmental meetings to coordinate the work of different departments. After the meeting, we will ask the office if they can further streamline their workflow to speed up their processing time. As for the situation in Hong Kong, I'd like to give you some information. Prior to the enactment of the ordinance, there were 30-odd private columbaria in Hong Kong. Upon enactment of the ordinance, some 30 of them ceased operation and 12 have their applications rejected by us. 6 withdrew their applications. For 18 columbaria, because they did not submit specified documents, we also rejected their applications. There are only 3 columbaria that are remaining. They are applying for licenses. Our proposal is that for application of exemption, one of the conditions is that the columbaria should not be located in densely populated residential district. As Hong Kong is a densely populated area, the 3 columbaria located in Hong Kong will not meet the conditions. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that the government should give us information on how they can streamline their workflow. Please let us know what concrete plans they have to speed up the processing time. Is there ways for members of the public to reach out to the officers under the Affairs Office? Can you give us information on how you will streamline your workflow and if you will engage technology to answer public inquiries? Thank you. We'll look into that with the office. Now it's my turn. Prior to the amendment proposals, a lot of columbaria are already licensed. Back then, they were not eligible for exemption. There was a question raised on land use. Mr. Look asked about this because now it's impossible for anyone to rezone agriculture or fish pond land to operate columbaria. And they have to pay land premium. I believe that the amount is very substantial. Now, there is an option of exemption, and the requirements have been relaxed. Prior to the proposal, some columbaria did not meet the requirements for exemption, and that's why they had no choice but to apply for licenses. For licensed columbaria, they have to pay a few $1 million to the government as land premium. For those licensed columbaria that should have been eligible for exemption under the proposal, This will they may feel that is unfair to them. Because now, as long as the Columbaria meet the 3 requirements under the exemption, they don't have to pay land premium. So this is unfair to Columbaria that have already obtained licenses. Is it possible for them to be unlicensed and apply for exemption instead? Deputy Press Secretary, thank you. I believe that you're talking about licensed pre-cut-off Columbaria. Back then, they did not meet the requirements for exemption. That's why they had no choice but to obtain licenses instead. But after obtaining license, they should have been selling or letting out niches. They would have be generating new revenue for their operation. In other words, there is a form of recurrent revenue for licensed Columbaria. For Columbaria granted with exemption, they cannot sell or let out new niches. Let me talk about why we offer this option of exemption. A lot of people have already purchased niches from Columbaria that have not been granted licenses. And if we ask them to cease operation, then we may cause nuisance to our ancestors. We don't want that to happen. For Columbaria that have been granted exemption, they don't have to dispose of the ashes, and we think that this is a reasonable thing to do. Licensees now have to collect fees from their family members every year. The previous practice was that the family members pay a fee once every 10 years or 5 years, for example. There could be outstanding payment from family members that are to be incurred by the Columbaria. Will the government make it flexible for the Columbaria such that they don't have to collect payment from family members once every year? Instead, they can collect, say, fees once every 5 to 10 years. Deputy Secretary. Now, in terms of the form of payment or frequency of payment, well, that depends on how the Columbaria is paying land premium. Because under the ordinance, the niches should not exceed the capacity of the Columbaria. If the capacity is exceeded, then the Columbaria will have to collect fees from customers every year. But if the capacity is not exceeded, then the Columbaria can collect fees from the family members once every 10 years. There is flexibility under the ordinance, and there is a relevant arrangement for them by the Lands Department. Next, Mr. Paul Che. Thank you. I received complaints from operators of Columbaria on the market. They find it unfair because for Columbaria that don't meet the requirements or simply are unwilling to submit applications, they are granted a new life under the amendment proposals. Now, the Deputy Secretary said that the licensees are able to sell or let out new niches and they're generating revenue. That's why it's not really unfair. I have a few questions. Now, first, can you give us some figures or statistics Now, apart from that, is it because of land restrictions or building restrictions? That's why the processing time is so long. Why do you feel confident that you're able to process all the applications within 6 years? Because the pledges of the government are usually not fulfilled. The government said previously that by a certain year we will achieve fiscal balance. And usually these promises are left unfulfilled. So please let us know the grounds for why you have such a confidence in yourself. Third, you said that there are 10 convictions. I wonder what is the range of the fine and what is the nature of the conviction. Because I'd like to see how serious the non-compliance is. And I wonder what the convictions are about. Are they about non-compliance with enforcement notices, or are they about overselling of niches? Because now the government is trying to raise the penalty substantially. And it seems that you're trying to pass the blame on to the market operators for your incompetency to manage the market. The property market is now experiencing a downturn. I wonder if the niches are actually selling out. Are the Columbaria making a huge profit? According to the market operators, this is not the case. I'd like to know why the penalty is raised to such a level. These are my questions for my first round. Deputy Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your comment. Regarding the challenges that we face in processing the application, I will ask the Affairs Office to answer that. As to why we're so confident that within the 6 years' time, that is the validity period of the TSOL, we'll be able to process all the applications. The reasons are twofold. Since 2017, we enacted the Columbaria, the ordinance. Back then, the ordinance were new to both the government and the Columbaria operators. But since then, 66 have already obtained the approval in principle TSOL, and some of them have approval in principle exemption, and which amount to 9 and 2 already obtained license. So we now are more familiar with the approval procedures. The licensing board and the private Columbaria Affairs Office are now more experienced in processing the applications, and the Columbaria operators are now also more familiar with the kinds of documents that they have to submit. Now, the member asked if the penalty is too heavy. We think that the level is appropriate because we've made reference to the gravity of the offense, the potential gain, and the impact caused to consumers. Mr. Che said that the prices of the niches is not as high as a few years ago, but the private Columbaria Affairs Office has collected numbers from the practitioners. As I mentioned, single niches, $100,000 to $200,000. double niches, some $200,000 to $400,000. These are recent figures. We think that we need to protect the rights of the consumers by setting the right level of penalty. As long as the operators don't break the law, the level of penalty has nothing to do with them. If the operators deliberately break the law, then we think that there should be a penalty that is deterrent enough. I'll ask the PCAO to talk about the challenges that they face.
Mr. Francis Cheng. Thank you, Chen. Thank you, Mr. Jie. In terms of the difficulties, now pre-cuts of Columbaria have existed for a long time. In the past, there was not a comprehensive regulatory system, so there were all sorts of non-compliance. For example, planning, land use, and building structure. We have used various means to regulate the pre-cuts of Columbaria by way of application guidelines, cross-departmental meetings, and so on. Now, a year ago, concerning compliance with the building ordinance, we have worked with other departments to improve the situation. In the past, Columbaria had to submit concrete plans of their building structure to prove that their buildings are safe. Now we have enhanced the requirements by allowing submission of alternative plans, for example, limiting the number of visitors allowed into the building and other measures. Still, there are quite a number of applicants which are not likely to get the license. So if there are no temporary extension for them, it may call for an ash disposal operation. So that's why we are relaxing the law to prevent that from happening. Mr. Chair, so do you have a record of the data I asked? If not, maybe next time. Mr. Zhang, about the 10 cases, they were all ruled to be operating unlicensed private Columbaria. Now, according to Section 10 of the law, if it has been ruled as a unlicensed Columbarium, they will not be allowed to continue operation unless they have an SI. Mr. Ambrose Lam, this is the second round. Mr. Stephen Ho. We will begin clause-by-clause scrutiny today. I think I will entertain a second round because the legal advisor also have questions. So we want to have the answers first. So I suggest not starting the clause-by-clause scrutiny today. Yes, I will allow the second round 5 minutes each. So we will start the clause-by-clause scrutiny the next time after completing the second round of questions today. Don't worry, Chair, I have a third round of questions as well. Mr. Ambrose Lam. Thank you. On safety, I have not visited a lot of Columbaria, but I still think some of them are really dangerous. I mean, at least those I have visited. Second, I was pleased to hear that the government is giving more care to the housing issue of ancestors than they do to living persons. So how many temporary niches we have in public Columbaria? Why is there such a huge price difference between public Columbaria and private Columbaria? Now, for private Columbaria, it costs some $300,000 each, but there are some luxurious flags as expensive as $1 million. So what is the ratio of housing units for ancestors in public and private columbariums. Now, the columbarium I visited lately maybe they wanted to advertise their license, so they showed me the license. The license told us how many niches there are. So by a simple calculation, they have sold at least a double of the approved limit. So that translates to $400 million. So I'm willing to pay a $10,000 fine per day to get that $400 million. So there are 50,000 deaths per year. By a simple calculation, $200,000 per niche, it translates into $1 billion, or $10 billion. So why isn't the situation as ideal as the government said? I'm not trying to challenge the data given to me by the administration. I just want to get a clear picture. Ms. Ivy Law. Thank you, Mr. Lam. On enforcement, I would defer to the PCAO on the number of public niches. As at early 2025, in our inventory, we have some 120,000 niches in public columbaria. So starting from mid-2020, we have cleared the queue. Also, we have new columbaria under planning, so more supply will come in the mid to long run. Mr. Ambrose Lam asked why there is such a huge price difference between public and private columbaria. Now, the government has a responsibility to cater for the public's needs in terms of niches, because life and death are matters of public concern. So we have to make sure that the niches are sold in an affordable prices to cater for the needs of the grassroots people. Now, like Mr. Lam said, there are cases where some family members would like to bury together with their ancestors. Some are because of feng shui and some have religious concerns. In some new columbaria, the setting is modern and there are special care services offered to the consumers. So the public can choose columbaria which suits their needs. The government's responsibility, on the other hand, is to ensure that there are sufficient niches. Now, like I said, we have approved 13 licenses for selling and leasing out new niches to the tune of 190,000 niches. So in the future, more and more niches will be sold and leased out in the market. I will defer to the PCAO on the question about enforcement. Mr. Francis Cheng. Thank you, Chair. On fire safety, that was one of the top priorities in the initial period when we start processing applications for license. So 77 pre-cuts of columbaria are confirmed to have met the basic building and fire safety requirements. So we learned that because we have consulted the fire services department and the building department, respectively. Certificates from experts have been submitted by the applicant and confirmed by the department. They have met the basic requirements. Now we are taking it to the next level concerning planning, land use, and other requirements. And then they will be given the specified instrument. Thank you. Next, Ms. Jovi Chan. Thank you, Chair. I agree with the Chair. Let's move on to clause-by-clause scrutiny next time because there is another meeting next door which we have to vote in. So I support the Chair's decision. I have two questions pending. But the two questions are for operators and public interest. Now, Mr. Benson Look, the Chair, and Mr. Paul Jie also mentioned this. I've received a complaint as well. The operators think that the interest would be undermined by the legislative amendments. The application for a license was considered a blessing, but now they think it is a curse because they need to pay the premium. Now, according to the administration, there would be recurrent earnings made by the operators, so that should be fine. However, if a columbarium is not selling new niches, is there another option for these columbarium? Of course, with a license, there are benefits which don't come with an exemption instrument. So for those operators who already have a license, can they switch to the other path? That is, switch to an exemption so as to save cost of the premium. That is their concern. The third question is about public interest. Now, the government said it would help relocate affected niches to a public columbarium. I know the government exercise a lot. I know the government is very helpful. They have a temporary niches. Now the charge is about $10 per month. So that is how the government is helping the affected parties with public resources. Now the prices of niches have climbed down. However, for private columbarium, it costs some hundred. It costs $10,000 per month for some cases. Now, will the temporary placing arrangements lead to an abuse of the public resources? Do we need to adjust the price of temporary placement? Deputy Secretary. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Chan. Ms. Chan said some operators with license think our proposals would be unfair to them. As I said, the intention of our proposals is to avoid the need of disturbing the interred ashes. That's why we want to provide another option for columbaria without a license to apply for an exemption. But that doesn't give them the right to sell or lease out new niches. So we are taking the perspective of protecting the consumers. Concerning specific cases mentioned by Ms. Jovi Chan, I will ask the colleague in the PCAO to reach out to Ms. Chan to understand the situations.
Second point on public columbaria. Perhaps we were not clear enough. Regarding the $20 per month fees, they're about public columbaria at Wohop Shack at Changchoi. The fee is $2,400 per 20 years. That's $20 per month. People can pay worship to their ancestors any day of the year. For temporary ash keeping, no fee is charged, because for those cases, we are not able to identify the claimants of the ashes. That's why no worshipping is allowed for the ashes that are temporarily kept with us. The reason why we offer temporary ash keeping is because we believe that, and we understand that some descendants of the ancestors may be working or studying overseas and they're not able to claim the ashes. We have some 10,000 places for temporary ash keeping, but we don't allow for any form of worshipping. Only 4% of the quotas have been used. We don't think that there is a need for us to draw a line as to the time limit for temporary ash keeping because there's still quotas left. Under the ordinance, we empower the Director of Food and Environmental Hygiene to process the unclaimed ashes at an appropriate time juncture. During the pre-meeting, when I heard about the $20 per month figure, I was surprised because it's so cheap. And now you said that for temporary ash keeping, it's free of charge. I know that you cannot charge the descendants of the ancestors whose ashes are not claimed, but for those family members of ancestors that you could contact, perhaps you should charge them a fee. Thank you. Let me talk about how we process or handle ashes. If due to various reasons the Columbaria needs to cease operation, then there will be a ash disposal procedures to go through. The Columbaria need to put up notice in the newspapers and to contact claimants to their best efforts. And within 1 year, the Columbaria should open their premises to claimants to reclaim the ashes. Say within 1 year time, there are still ashes that are unclaimed. And if that happened, the Columbaria operator can apply for extension of operation. And we may allow the operators to continue to keep their premises for the family members to claim their ashes. But if after that still there are ashes that are unclaimed due to unknown reasons, then the ashes will be handed over to the FHD and be kept at the Columbaria of the department for temporary keeping. We don't think there would be any cases of abuse. Mr. Paul Chair for the second round. Thank you. I'd like to follow up on this answer that the Deputy Secretary just gave. It seems that the government is quite effective. There are some 77,300 places, and only less than 4% of the places are being used. So is your worry about large-scale ash disposal over-exaggerated? Should you accord or adjust your priority given the situation? Second, I haven't done any research on this, but say, for example, a developer violate the regulations of selling uncompleted flats, what is the penalty? Now, the penalty for overselling of niches is very heavy. I wonder if the penalty is equally heavy for regular developers. Regarding the 10 convictions, they're about illegal operation. But as for non-compliance with enforcement notices or conditions set out in specified instruments, it seems that there's no conviction relating to this. The government said that they want to enhance the deterrent effect of the penalty. by raising the level. But given that no convictions have been reached because of non-compliance with enforcement notices or conditions set out in the SI, I believe that the current penalty level is sufficient. I don't think that we need to set the penalty as high. As a barrister and a lawyer for so many years, I don't agree with the saying that operators who don't break the law shouldn't be worried about the level of penalty. As a society with law and order, I don't think that we should adopt this kind of mindset. We shouldn't justify raising penalty disproportionately by adopting this principle. You should only raise the penalty when there is serious abuse and violation of regulations. I don't want to hear this saying again. We should not replace supervision by penalty. We should not raise the penalty level unnecessarily or to an extent that is too high. If there are not many cases of non-compliance, we shouldn't perhaps raise the penalty to such a level. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your reminder and your comment. Thank you. For temporary places for ash keeping that amount to 77,000, they are not just for unclaimed ashes at private Columbaria. They are also for unclaimed ashes or corpse uncovered in other places. In fact, 70% of the claimants may need to relocate the ashes of their ancestors. So we shouldn't be focusing on unclaimed ashes. We need to also look after the family members who need to relocate the ashes of their ancestors. For the 48 Columbaria, some 200,000 niches are with ashes interred. So a large number of ancestors are involved. We want to strike a balance between public interest while offering an option for the Columbaria so that they don't have to dispose of ashes by granting them an exemption instead of a license. This is my response to the first question. Second, Mr. Chair reminded us that the penalty should be consistent, proportionate, and reasonable. We completely agree with that. When we decided on the penalty, we have looked at whether it's consistent and proportionate. As I've mentioned, the price of a niche can be very expensive, and the profit that can be generated is very appealing. That's why we think that the penalty should be proportionate. Also, we look at other ordinances to make sure that our penalty is consistent with other penalty of other offenses. For illegal operation of Columbaria, the maximum penalty is a imprisonment of 7 years and a fine of $5 million. So we believe that the fine and the imprisonment term is consistent. Third, well, I will ask the Affairs Office to elaborate. Thank you. Let me talk about cases of non-compliance with enforcement notices. Well, under what circumstances will we issue enforcement notices? Well, only when the Columbaria breach the conditions set out by the licensing board by, for example, not offering a 14-day cooling period for the customers or violating the fire safety requirements. These conditions are put in place by the licensing board. When there is non-compliance, we don't charge them or prosecute them. We issue them with an enforcement notice instead. We give them time to rectify the situation. If the operator does not comply with the enforcement notice, we'll consider prosecution. So there is flexibility in the procedure and room for operators to take remedial action. We have issued enforcement notices before. There were operators that breached our conditions. If the operators promise that they will not violate the conditions again and have taken remedial actions, then we will not prosecute them. We must wrap up the meeting by 4:30. I'll allow you to put follow-up question. Perhaps my question was not put clear enough. I'd like to ask, out of the 10 convictions, apart from illegal operation of Columbaria, is there any cases of non-compliance with enforcement notices involved, such that you prosecuted them? Because, my point was that for licensed Columbaria, they would treasure their licenses and they would tend not to break any rules or regulations. For illegal operation, of course, you need to prosecute them. But I wonder, out of the 10 convictions, is there any cases of non-compliance with enforcement notices among them? Regarding consistency, I'm not just talking about comparison with other legislation, but I'm talking about how Columbaria compares with regular property. Thank you. Out of the 10 convictions, they're about illegal operation of private Columbaria, but not non-compliance with enforcement notices. Well, so this proves my point. There is enough regulation in place to supervise and monitor the licensed Columbaria. So there is no need for you to put in place such a heavy fine and prison term to achieve your intended deterrent effect. Deputy Secretary, thank you. We note Mr. Chair's comment. When we conducted public consultation, we set out the penalty level clearly, and most of the views said that they supported our proposal. When we went to the panel of the LegCo, the members of the panel supported our proposal. Please allow me. According to the summary of the outcome of the public consultation, well, the 6 questions are quite dense. You ask if the government should protect the consumers' rights. I think that all of the questions are out of context. You should set out in the consultation paper that no one have been convicted for non-complying with the enforcement notices. Then people wouldn't have this information, and they would, of course, agree with your proposal. I haven't really looked at the summary of consultation outcome, but as I said previously, as a lawyer, we shouldn't raise all the penalty blindly in order to deter all forms of crime. Even with the existing penalty, there is no non-compliance with enforcement notices. Say, for example, selling of or overselling of niches or overplacing of ashes. The fine is so high and the imprisonment term is this harsh. I think that this could be a form of over-regulation. I know that the fine handed down by the court is usually lower, but for operators of private Columbaria, I think that this may not be reasonable, just as we are not trying to fine or penalize our property developers because they are dying out. I think that we should try to be lenient instead. We need to let all parties of society to rest, given the current situation of our economy. I don't think that it's time for us to raise the fine or penalty level.
Maybe you can save your question for next time, Mr. Jie. We still have Mr. Ambrose Lam and myself. It's okay. I haven't extended the meeting because we need to end at 4:30. So we'll continue with the discussion on policy matters the next time, and maybe we can start the clause by clause as well. Also, the reply of the administration to the legal advisor is pending, and the administration will provide us with other documents next time. The meeting is adjourned.